Welcome to Performance Anxiety. We're doing something a little different with this show, and hopefully this will lead to more episodes similar to this. We're doing a little side project, me and my own personal Jay-Z, Jordon Zadorozny from Point to the Star. We're going to discuss different aspects of music, and tonight, on the very first episode of this side project, we're going to discuss the shifting mood of David Lee Roth era Van Halen. And Jordon, I know this is something that's near and dear to your heart, so let's jump right into it.
Sure. I mean, I was just sort of, like we were saying earlier, to fans of this era of Van Halen, the albums have grown distinct personalities that transcend the membership of the band, and they just sort of have taken on. Each of them is, if you're a fan, so different from the other.
Yeah.
And each has a prevailing mood, I feel, somehow.
I would agree. I would definitely agree. And you had suggested that we go through album by album, since there's only 6, really, if you don't count a different kind of truth, which
I know, and I didn't even think about that until today, and I thought, well, maybe we should talk a little bit about that again.
So let's jump in with Van Halen 1.
So chapter 1 is called Auto Perfection. They were just born perfect on this first album. They had been playing in the clubs in Hollywood for years. And, they probably had a catalog of over 30 original songs. I don't know the exact number, but
there were a lot.
They had a lot to pick from, right?
Yeah. And
Ted Templeman, big shot Doobie's producer, comes in, and, basically, on your first album, the band is relatively powerless, and I'm sure Ted was like picking songs, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, cherry picking the best.
Largely his decision. And so the song selection, it's perfect, basically. And sonically, it feels so unified, so disciplined. And it has, some very famous features like, the guitar dry panned to one side of the stereo spectrum, and then the big reverb on the other side. This creating, this huge sound when there's only just one rhythm guitar happening at times. Although there are more overdubs on the first album than guitar overdubs on the first album than the other ones, than any of the other albums, I think. Maybe Diver Down, there's a bit more, but there's a lot of doubling up on Van Halen 1. And anyway, it just sounds really unified. What was your first experience with it? Like, how did you first encounter it?
I went through Van Halen in a weird way. My very first Van Halen album was actually 1984. I was at a version of Walmart in New Jersey. My mom's like, "Oh, go buy an album. I'll let you get a tape." It was a cassette, and so I came out with Quiet Riot's Mental Health, and she looked at it and she's like, "No." She's like, "How about this?" And she pulls out 1984 because I guess she was familiar with the song Jump. And I'm like, all right, you got like the Man in the Iron Mask or an angel with a pack of cigs. I'm like, all right.
It comes off more like an infant smoking cigarettes. So it's like your mom thought that was better. More okay.
It was more appropriate for like.
What was Mental Health? It was just a dude in a hockey mask. Didn't it look like Hannibal Lecter or something?
Yeah. It was kind of like Man in the Iron Mask, Silence of the Lambs, stuff like that. But
it was years before Silence of the Lambs.
Exactly. So it was kind of funny that she picked that one. But I'm assuming she had heard Jump on the radio or something like that. So I kind of like this song. So I said, okay, fine. So that was my first experience with Van Halen. And then I went back and started getting their back catalog.
Right.
And I remember getting the cassette and taking my little boombox up to my sister had a little play set.
Are we still talking about 1984 because we're on the first album?
No, we're going back. We're going back to the first album. So I liked 1984 so much that I went back and started to collect their back catalog, which they're one of the first bands that I did that with.
Okay.
Van Halen and Led Zeppelin, although Led Zeppelin was nothing but back catalog at that time. So, anyway, I digress. So my sister had a swing set up on the corner of our property, and it was one of the only places I could go and listen to something and just be alone. So I figured, all right, I'll grab my boombox, my cassette tape of Van Halen 1 and go up there. And I just sat there on a swing, just blown away by it because I had never heard anything, and I'd heard 1984, but 1984 is a lot more polished than Van Halen 1. They had more experience in the studio. I heard Eruption, and it was just mind-blowing. I mean, Running with the Devil was a great opener, but Eruption, I'd never really heard anything like that before. So that kept me going. And songs like Atomic Punk with that weird scratching of the strings on the guitar to the intro.
With
and then
phaser pedal happening,
yeah, exactly. And then, going into something so just different as Ice Cream Man. I was really amazed by the range that they had on it.
Mm-hmm.
So when was the first time you heard the album?
So I was, I grew up in a small town, and sometimes we would go see our cousins in Ottawa, which is the big city. And one of my cousins lived in sort of a high rise in an okay neighborhood, and I used to love going there because it seemed really they were up on like the 16th floor or something. So at night you could see the entire skyline of the city, which is a pretty big deal to a country kid.
Right, yeah.
At the time when I went, I think I was about 9 years old or so, or 8 maybe younger. I found like his kid, he was a teenager, so he would be gone and I would get to hang out in his room. It was like red curtains and so he had all these like, Kiss Alive albums. So I opened that up and was like, whoa, who are these
Farrah Fawcett posters on the wall?
Pretty much, yeah. And football dudes. But there was a cassette of Van Halen 1. So I put it on the little boombox. And so my first memory is like looking out at the night skyline, from his bedroom.
Oh, wow. In
total darkness in this room. And there was something about that went with the sound of Van Halen 1, particularly the deep reverb,
Yeah.
And looking at the skyline and just sort of the visual and the sonic elements merging.
Well,
so it was a really sort of impactful first listen, but this was before I really kind of knew who they or anyone was. Like I was just I was like 8, just almost knowing who the Eurythmics were,
Okay.
Almost. That was next year.
Yeah.
I was still in like Beatles, Elvis phase, So,
okay.
But I do remember listening to the whole thing and just like the mood of it was like very, very strong. I don't know if I liked or disliked. I think I liked. But then when I was, I was like you, I got 1984 was the big album that came out, and I bought it and loved it, and then went backwards through the albums. But I think Van Halen 1 was the second one I encountered.
Yeah.
At that later stage in my life, like 11, 12, when you're like, you know the names of the band members.
Yeah.
And stuff,
Oh, yeah.
So I loved it then. Feel Your Love Tonight was kind of my favorite. It was the easiest to get into for me. It was like real rock and roll.
Okay.
And Ice Cream Man was easy because I loved, Elvis and bluesy rockabilly stuff. But it was the chorus of Running with the Devil that just, I couldn't get my head around. It was so beautiful, but weird that these beautiful angelic vocals will be playing over this fairly demonic riff that was kind of like Black Sabbath or something.
Yeah. Yeah. And you had
there
David
was a guy
Lee
on
Roth's
the
crazy
internet that
vocals.
sort of, yeah, and there was a guy I saw on the internet, this really smart guy, and he breaks down songs and albums and stuff. And he said that there's like a brief second of dissonance in that chorus where the vocals and the guitar for a brief second create a harmonic dissonance. And I'd never, it's so fast. It happens so quickly that, but he'd sort of like parsed it and figured that out. But I think that's kind of the moment of the record in a way. It's like, it's really, I love Little Dreamer. That's the song I remember the most from that first experience of like looking out the city. Little Dreamer playing.
I can imagine, I can imagine you looking out at a city skyline and hearing Running with the Devil. Cause to me, that opening bass and just seeing
there's even reverb on the intro bass there.
Yeah. And just to me, that sounds like it's a song that was written in a city for a city.
Exactly. That is definitely city music.
Yeah. And I lived in New Jersey at the time, but in a very rural section. So I was, my skyline was trees too. So, but I was only an hour out of New York and an hour out of Philly. So I could kind of picture it. It made me feel like I was in one of those places, almost dirty.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it was I don't know. It wasn't, the record was several years old at the time, but it sounded a lot different than anything else I was listening to, even 1984, but because at the time I was listening to shredders like Satriani and Vai and on, and this was more built around the song, but it had the qualities of Satch and Vai's stuff, but there was more song structure to, and vocals. I mean, those guys didn't do a whole lot of vocals at the time. So.
And the guitar solos are quite short.
Yeah, but they're amazing. They're
heroic, but they're short. And then either the breakdown or the third verse or a chorus comes in. It's like they're just a quick part of most of the songs. He doesn't, except for the later outros. He starts. That's where they give Eddie a minute and a half to really blow.
Yeah. Well, I had read the book that Noel Monk wrote about a year or so ago, Running with the Devil. And he was talking about how, they'd been playing for years and years together. So, they were tight with their own stuff, but they knew like 300 cover songs at that point. Yeah. So I'm kind of surprised that there's only one cover on that album. You Really Got Me. And, they kind of made that their own. And that album is that's one of the, I guess, better known songs on the album. But I was surprised that looking at some of their later albums, which we'll get into, that there's only one cover on that whole album. So,
yeah, there's a funny story about, I think they put out the You Really Got Me single either weeks or a month or something before the album came out.
Yes.
And yeah, so they had like test pressings, and Eddie was going around town showing all his buds, and he's all proud. And apparently, now I think it's this band, the guy from Angel heard it. And he was like, oh my God, this is going to be huge. And apparently they tried to rush release their own cover of You Really Got Me. But I guess Warner Brothers heard about it and pumped it back into overdrive and like got it out quick.
Oh, gee, yeah, I hadn't heard that. I knew that from reading Noel's book that single had gone out way in advance of the album, but I didn't know that's funny.
Yeah.
Oh man! All right, so
someone fact check me if it's not Angel, but I remember that story. So let's talk about Van Halen 2.
Yes.
So this one I've chaptered Sloppy Joe and a Coke.
All right.
This one sounds like Van Halen in the rehearsal space after their big, successful tour of the first album. They opened for Black Sabbath, and I think they did some theater, started doing theater, small theater shows of their own.
Mm-hmm.
And, the first album was a hit. So they were on their way. They had, the future was theirs. So they get back to Los Angeles, and, they have a bunch of songs left over, but they don't have time to write a whole bunch of new stuff. So
Exactly. And
I think most of these are left over.
I think you're right. And it definitely sounds like they're the leftovers to me.
Dance the Night Away, I think they wrote to order, like for a single.
Oh, yeah.
But most of these, I think, were already being played in the clubs. Most of them, not Spanish Fly, maybe.
Probably. Yeah.
Sloppy Joe and a Coke. It sounds like post tour. They're like back at their rehearsal space, which was in Dave's dad's basement, by the way. How cool! He had a big mansion in Pasadena.
Yeah, David did come from money. That is true.
Yeah. So that was their pad. And if you look at old pictures, it's like, wow, they got some space down there. It looks really nice. I bet you there's lots of slits in the fridge.
Yeah. I did find out something interesting, though. I didn't realize that David Lee Roth's uncle owned the Cafe Wah in New York.
Yeah. Was it Uncle Manny or something?
Yeah, Uncle Manny. Name? Yes.
Yeah. That's where they did their comeback club show.
Yeah, and I've got
2012, I think.
I've got a bootleg of Jimi Hendrix and Jim Morrison playing at the Cafe Wah.
Oh, I woke up this morning and found myself dead?
Yes.
Is that what it's called? Yeah.
It is atrocious.
I love that title. Yeah, so it's a sloppier record. It's like that, the precision, even just in the recording. But to me, this is like what Van Halen actually sounds like.
Okay.
This is when you get invited over to the rehearsal space and they're just playing for their friends.
Yeah.
This is kind of what they sound like, I think Eddie's more unhinged here, and he's starting to get, I don't know what other word to use, but he's starting to get weirder.
Yeah.
with his craft and with, his solos and just his approach is getting more tangential, more exploratory, a bit rougher. And, people say that on that tour, the Van Halen 2 tour, is that's the tour where the improvisations were the best that they had ever done. They were really kind of extending parts more than they did later on. They tightened it back up to like more of a rock and roll extravaganza with discipline. But I haven't heard a lot of tapes from it, but that's just stuff I've read on the internet. Is that this tour was where he and Alex really let loose,
Yeah, and I haven't heard a whole lot of live stuff, or early live shows from Van Halen, just a few. But to me, I remember getting this album and being disappointed in it, just because one was so good, and having a history with it in 1984. I remember listening to it, and they had a one or two covers on it. One, the Good. But the song that stood out to me was "Beautiful Girls,"
right?
And that was a lighter tune. They still sound like a party band, and they sounded
absolutely.
And that's what they started off as, playing in people's backyards. And the first two albums, it seems like Dave's in his element. I mean, because that's what Dave wants to do. He just wants to be the front man for a party band. And the funny thing is, I was listening to all the albums today just to kind of bone up on everything for this. And I noticed something, and it struck me that if you listen to the solo for the song Bottoms Up, the tone on the guitar sounds similar to tones I've heard on other period albums. And maybe as a producer, you can explain how or why this happens, or if this is something they're going for, but it almost sounds like the amp and the mic are in two different rooms. There's this like a hollowness to the guitar solo.
I would have to listen to it once. I wish I could, but that very well may be the case. They could have used an ambient miking technique on the solo to give it some sort of spatial depth in the mix, where they would back they may have a mic right on the amp, but they would have a second mic backed off to capture the sound of the room.
Okay.
It could be that. It could be a reverb effect from a box. But I'll listen to it and I'll tell you what I think. I love the riff on DOA. It's just, what?
Yes.
Mind bender. Like, it's so fun to play too, that riff.
Oh,
if you have a great amp.
Yeah.
I have an old Plexi, like a 1968 Marshall. Like,
oh, man.
Oh, when you play DOA through that amp, it's so fun.
And that's something I've noticed with these two albums, is that the songs, the structure seems to be pretty simple. And I never really realized it until recently, because I'm listening for Eddie's solo and Dave's vocals and all the stuff that's on top. But if stripping it down to the actual song structure, the songs are pretty simple.
They utilize the pop structure.
Yeah.
And we're a heavy metal band that utilized the pop structure. And that was fairly novel. Dave and the rest of them too, I imagine, just adhered to that aesthetic. If you look at what they were playing in the clubs, it wasn't a lot of heavy metal. It was a lot of like Casey and the Sunshine Band, that kind of stuff is what they were playing.
Right, yeah, because back in their cover days, they would be told they have to play these cover songs to get into the clubs.
Hits.
Yeah,
top 40 they used to call it.
Yeah, yeah, back when there was such a thing. So here's the story behind me hearing this album for the first time was I asked for it for Christmas when I was 12, and my mom, all of a sudden, 2 weeks before Christmas, I look under the tree and there's a package that looks suspiciously like a vinyl LP. And and I had a stereo in my bedroom, so there was no way I was waiting 2 weeks to hear Van Halen 2, because I hadn't heard it yet and I was becoming a really big fan. Yeah.
So one evening I gently unpacked it in my room.
Does your mom know this yet? Your mom has never figured this out?
I'll get to that.
Okay.
And I had it in my room for 2 weeks before Christmas. Yeah, it was beautiful.
Oh.
Low volume in case she might know what Van Halen 2 sounded like, as if. Oh yeah, I know that one, Spanish Fly. Yep. So, so I heard it for 2 weeks and then I repackaged it, but I was really, really bad at it. And when we opened the gifts, I was like, "Oh, I'm going to open this," and Mom had seen that the tape, the packing job had been butchered. Oh, come on, Jordan. She was not pleased.
Oh, no.
I got the stink eye all Christmas.
Oh, there's nothing worse than a Christmas stink eye.
Oh, my God.
That's terrible.
I think I might, at the time, I don't think I was disappointed. I think I thought it was about on a par once I got into it. I loved Beautiful Girls. I loved Women in Love.
Yeah.
You're No Good. And then as I got in my older teen years, then I really started to love the heavier songs, DOA.
Yeah.
Out of Love Again is amazing.
My favorites were Beautiful Girls and
speed metal almost.
I Light Up the Sky.
Sorry, yeah. That's actually, I think, my adult favorite.
Yeah.
And that's the one at the time where Eddie was like, check out where we're going with things like Light Up the Sky. He's like, that's the progression of the band. That's what he was saying.
And see, for me at that time, I was basically shunning pop music when I heard this. I liked Hall & Oates and some of the stuff, but I listened to that on the sly. None of my friends knew that. That was all in secret. What I was listening to that everybody knew was stuff like Megadeth, Metallica, Testament.
Okay.
So, and Van Halen was acceptable in those crowds. So,
oh yeah.
So that's why when I got this album, I was like, it's not. I thought it was going to be heavier, and
it's not metal. Yeah,
it's
party rock.
Exactly, and it's grown on me over the years. It's still probably my least favorite of all the David Lee Roth albums. So where does it rank as far as you so far?
I'm not sure. I love a lot of it. I'm less into the last two songs, Women in Love and Beautiful Girls I used to love, and now they're good. But yeah, Light Up the Sky. I love Bottoms Up.
And
I love Again. DOA is my favorite.
Well, in listening to it today, a couple things struck me is that it sounds like, it's definitely just a carryover from Van Halen 1. And you can tell a lot of the lyrics either seem like they were rushed or they didn't work on them. They just went into the studio with what they had. Because if you listen to them, there's a lot of like sexy cliches in there. And, it's I almost feel dirty. like I need to go to confession.
It's a looser album, and it's more revealing of their personality. So
yeah, definitely. So
I call it Sloppy Joe and a Coke because it's sloppy, and it's also the album where they really, drugs entered the studio, and so
yeah, they really got into Coke,
that's where it started,
or Krell, like as they called it. that was their code word for cocaine, was Krell.
That's amazing.
I don't know.
Okay, Women and Children first.
Women and Children first. All right.
I like the way the line runs up the back of this stocking. I've always liked those kind of high heels too, No, don't take them off. Leave them on. Yeah, that's it. A little more to the right.
What do we call on this check?
I call this one Party On, Wayne. To me, this solidifies their reputation as the badass teenager party band. And there's that scene in Fast Times where the two kids come up and they're trying to buy they're trying to buy tickets from the Scalper Kid.
Yes.
2 tickets to Van Halen.
Yeah.
Hey, don't call it scalping. I provide a service. That guy.
Oh, what a great movie.
Yeah. Those tickets were $12.50.
Oh, God, what I wouldn't do for $12.50 tickets now.
Oh, my God. Yeah, and so, everyone wants them. It's just so tribal, that beat, and just, it was written for their audience. And the Cradle Will Rock, it's about, the good boy gone wrong.
Yes. And that seems it's a more complex theme than anything off the first two albums.
Have you seen Junior's Great? Yeah.
That's a great starting to throw those little quips in there. I love that.
Yeah.
That's definitely Dave.
It's loose like Van Halen 2, but it's also more anarchic. There's Fools and Tora Tora, there's a punk edge or something, a dirty kind of real fuck you kind of edge in the riffs coming out.
Yeah, Loss of Control. That song is just it's
off the rails completely.
Yeah.
But then there's those last 3 songs. Take Your Whiskey Home, which is really curious because you hear acoustic guitar for the first time.
And I found out that was actually the song Michael Anthony had written from his prior band Snake.
Get out of town.
No, he'd actually had that riff way beforehand. So that song had actually been around. So possibly, I guess maybe that's one they were working on.
In interviews I've heard, and The Cradle Will Rock was written on a Wurlitzer. I think a Wurlitzer.
Really? I didn't.
Rhodes.
I'd never heard
that's
that.
the main riff. That's not a guitar. It's just played through a Marshall amp, so it's distorted.
Oh, wow.
So it would sound like a guitar. And apparently Alex and Eddie would rehearse that every day for 2 weeks, and they couldn't think of a second part. And then finally they came up with a second part, and then Dave added his stuff. And then they do Could This Be Magic, which I always thought was so charming.
I love that song.
Me too, and I was so surprised that it was an original song. I thought, Wow, that sounds like one of their wacky covers.
Yeah, it does. It does. It sounds like some weird blues thing that they did. But and then they slide right into a simple rhyme.
Now that was the song that really got me. It was always my favorite on the record. It's sort of almost has almost sort of a Zeppelin-esque structure to it. You know, it has like these it's slightly progressive.
And it changes tempo. It's just...
Yeah, it's a real anomaly for them, I feel.
Yeah, definitely.
And it works, I feel.
Yeah, it's a definite leap in songwriting for them from what they had released on the first two albums.
Yeah.
It's much more complex.
Yeah.
I get the feeling that all of the band members, everybody who was contributing to the songwriting, was getting more and more confident in what they were doing. So it's because I know, looking at the charts, Van Halen 2 didn't do nearly as well as Van Halen 1. And so I think they were a little taken aback by it. And I think spent maybe a little more time in songwriting. At least Dave did. Cause I feel like Eddie, and I feel like this is something that goes through the progression of the band. And I'm sure we'll talk about it for the next three albums, that Eddie didn't want to be just a guitarist. He wanted to be a musician, a composer. Mm-hmm. And I feel like he's really starting to feel that itch on this album.
I agree. Yep.
And so the music got heavier, less of a party feel for it. And things got a little darker. Not completely, because you've got, Take Your Whiskey Home.
Yeah, side one is is the party side, and then side two is sort of the weirder side.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I can't really think of a song I dislike on this album. It's just every song is fantastic, and even the short stuff. And I'm looking here online right now. I never noticed this. It says there's a 19-second hidden track called "Growth" after "In a Simple." Yeah,
that's that weird. Just sort of grungy, almost instrumental.
I always thought that part that's called "Growth" was just a weird coda, because the whole album is just so weird that it just made sense that would just be the ending of "In a Simple Rhyme." But I did find an interesting little bit of trivia about Women and Children First.
Tell me.
Background vocals on "Could This Be Magic"? Nicolette Larson.
Oh, right, yeah. I didn't know that. As far as I know, that wasn't credited, but I had the cassette, and there was no packaging that came with the Warner Brothers cassette.
Right.
There was no... So that poster, that came with it, with Dave.
Yeah.
That huge poster. And there was some sort of package or pictures or something that I didn't see until way later.
Yeah, I just got the CD of it, the early first version, and that was same as the cassette. You opened it up and it was just white on the other side of the cover artwork. Oh. So I didn't know anything about it. So yeah, if you like Lotta Love, hey, check out Could This Be Magic? Same lady she has a fantastic voice.
Yep,
I love Nicolette Larson. Anyway, okay. So moving on. This is also the first album with no covers.
Oh yeah. So I think that's part of like Eddie's, like, hey, let's be a serious band.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's part of where the fracturing of the band started to take place, because Dave liked doing covers and weird standards, and he
was with the producer, Ted Templeman. He wanted hits and covers. He liked it.
And there's definitely a touch of vaudeville in Diamond Dave.
Oh, yeah.
So, all right. So moving on. Our next chapter.
called The Willful Child. This is Eddie pushing his weight around. And basically they kind of let him have his way. Word is he wanted more overdubs. He wasn't necessarily as into just having the records represent what the live band sounded like. He was okay with let's let the record be a record and we'll do some overdubs. Ted didn't like this, so Eddie would come in after hours and work with Don Landy. And so this is where he and Don Landy, the engineer who worked under Ted, this is where Ed and Don really start connecting and forging their own way of doing things.
Okay.
So all of the miking techniques and the reverb concepts of Eddie's sound and like how his tone changes from album to album, the peculiarities of those things are all being worked out by Don and Ed alone. They're like, Ted Templeman's a hitman.
Yeah.
We're artists.
Yeah. Yep.
Yep. And so Eddie has his caddy and they sculpt out the sonic terrain. So all kinds of fun, meaty guitar stuff happening on this. This is the record that Frank Zappa was like, oh, okay, I get it now. This kid's serious.
Okay.
And they did some weird stuff together and hung out.
Oh, man. I didn't know that Eddie and Frank had done stuff together.
I think Eddie produced a single by his daughter, perhaps, I want to say.
Oh, Moon Unit?
I can't remember. Something like that.
Yeah, Eddie did a lot of weird branching out starting around this time. He would, uncredited work, too. Yeah,
Dave didn't like it. Dave said, Eddie, you're cheapening our brand, basically, before people use that awful word brand.
Yeah.
But that's basically what he was saying. It's like, to keep Van Halen special, you don't go and play on other people's records. And Eddie is sort of starting to be celebrated within the LA musician community, which started feeling really good to him, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And so he started doing sessions and bouncing around town and chasing down Alan Holdsworth and stuff. And so you can really hear Eddie's ideas really starting to expand here. This is really Edward's album.
Yeah, definitely. With things like Sunday Afternoon in the Park, that's really experimental for Van Halen at the time. I mean, because I don't even know what it sounds like. It sounds like a blob. I can't really, describe it. If you haven't heard it, it sounds like if your kids.
I've heard that's Dave on the synth, actually.
Really?
I've heard that. Yeah.
It sounds like when your kids make slime, and it just kind of you just do like.
That's why it makes sense that Dave came up with that riff, perhaps.
That's a good point. But it sounds like Unchained. That's
a monstrous.
It's
towering riff.
Yeah, it's detuned and it's distorted and it's just angry,
chunky, and disciplined somehow as well. It's like,
well, it's Eddie. He's a technician. Even when he tries to
Sinner's Swing is where he really gets wild. Like his feel is really loopy and crazy on that.
Oh yeah,
it's very difficult to play that kind of stuff and sound like Eddie Van Halen. Like the rhythm parts on Sinner's Swing, it's like, what are you doing? Just as his attack comes in at such odd times. And
oh yeah, I mean, you get Mean Streets, Dirty Movies. They're all just, the whole album is their, I think it's their darkest album. Even the cover art, everything's brown and dirty.
Yeah.
Everything sounds brown on the album. And it's I don't know what it was about that era. What did that come out? Like late
81,
79 or 80 or something like that, or 78?
Fair Warning's 81.
Okay, so what was about that time period where everything was this disgusting brown?
Okay,
green,
well, drugs had set into the band pretty heavily. So I think the first serious hangovers were starting to happen. And the serious discontent within the band, I think, is starting to happen at this time as well.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's a pissed off sounding album from Dave. It sounds pissed off from Eddie. And the other guys play great. Mike sounds like he's more disco somehow on this album.
Yeah. Push comes to shove. That's
the flanger pedal going, and he's like kind of bouncing all over the place, having a really good time, and everyone else is playing really dark riffs. It's an interesting
which is
mix.
it's totally Michael Anthony. He's just
Ba-da-ba.
and then push comes to shove. He's got that disco bass going.
Well, Dirty Movies sounds like a disco song straight up to me. Like,
oh yeah. But if you listen to Push Comes to Shove, he does that typical bass riff, disco bass riff, and then the guitar tone is that weird, clean disco tone. It's not my.
That's from playing
favorite.
funk covers in the club days.
Oh yeah, okay. So their party days and their covers come back in a different way then.
Yeah,
it manifests itself outside of covers.
Well, one of the things that happened is that when Eddie would play in the clubs, when they'd be doing songs by R&B bands, he would try to cover the harmonic territory of the horn section.
Oh, wow.
As well as being the guitar player. So he's like, brown, ticka, 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 and then doing the funk stuff up on the high notes.
Yeah.
And that you can kind of hear that, how it influenced how he writes riffs even, you know? Where he has like this sort of like, he'll be doing different things on the high strings than he is on the low strings.
Right,
and so in effect, like the low strings are the horns and the high string is the guitar.
Okay.
You know, like, so you're starting to hear a lot of that too. Mean Street, I mean, the guitars on that are just beautifully orchestrated. And the solo, one of his greatest, just the way it comes in with that dive bomb is just like, that split second, gives me chills every time.
Oh man, it's. I love this album. It's to me, it's underrated. Yeah. I mean, it's got. If you look at
not amongst fans, it's highly rated amongst fans.
That's true.
But yeah, to the population in general, like even the crowd at a Van Halen show, a lot of the people might not know One Foot Out the Door. You know.
No, I mean, the only thing that's really well known is Unchained.
Right. And Mean Street. So This Is Love was a single.
Yeah.
We saw that on Much Music a lot.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because they didn't really have a lot of Van Halen videos. They had overplayed everything on 1984, so they were like, what else can we play? So there's like 15 minutes of footage shot from an Oakland concert from 81 from this tour. So it was This Is Love and Unchained.
I saw that So This Is Love today. I went on YouTube and I'm at my job and I'm just listening to Van Halen all day long, just picking a playlist, Van Halen, and picking the full album. And so when it gets down to so This Is Love on this album, it's the live clip. For some reason they don't. I guess the studio clip got deleted or something. I don't.
Oh, okay. Yep.
I don't know why.
It's a good version. It's a great version.
Yeah.
They're great on this tour. I really wish I would have been old enough to see them at this time because.
Oh, me too. I was 8, so that wasn't going to happen. But,
I think we're the same age. So I was like, oh man.
So
but I wasn't. I didn't know about them. But So This Is Love really kind of stands out as like a pop song that almost you could have imagined on the first album, perhaps. But there's like a new there's Eddie's like getting more nimble, you know, and he's like finger picking those chords in the verses, and it's getting more harmonically complex, and he's like at once more jazzy, but also I hear like little Pete Townsend things coming in with the suspended chords, and like his playing is getting really colorful, and the sonic palette that they used, you know, and bringing in the flanger pedal a lot on this record, and working closely with Landy after hours after, you know, they sent Ted and Dave out of the room, you know, it's really starting to pay off. And I guess it didn't sell all that well.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think they released a single.
Damn.
Yeah.
And there's no covers on this one. Again, another album with no covers.
Yeah.
But,
So the reason why I called it The Willful Child is like Eddie takes over, you know, and it's his vision and he shoves it down their throat, kicking and screaming. Dave and Ted.
Yeah. But
And
I think
it's a beautiful album whose reputation is, you know, stellar.
Yeah. And I think even Dave's lyrics were still growing. I think he was doing I mean, he was telling stories now instead of just, you know, committing sexual assault in music form.
Sort of bragging. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, my cat is really lonely. I've been away for a couple of days.
Oh.
You okay, babe? Go ahead. She likes to sit on the studio amplifier where it's really warm.
Oh, what's her favorite Van Halen song?
Ever?
What's your cat's favorite song?
Oh, Penelope. She likes to hear about it later.
Oh, so there you go.
Which I love as well. That's a really, really, really great track.
Yeah, this whole album, to me, it's one of the albums that I picked up later, and I regret not getting it earlier because it's for not having, like you said, singles and not having a whole lot of well-known songs on it. Because if you look at their greatest hits albums, the only thing on there is I think Unchained and Mean Street, maybe Mean Street, maybe.
Oh, okay.
I don't even know if it's on the good. I think
I don't think it is.
I know Unchained is, and that may be the only one representing this album. So
yeah,
it's a shame. So the next album, Diver Down.
Right.